Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze with The Conscious Resistance, and you are watching episode 165 of The Conscious Resistance Live, brought to you by Civil over at civil.com, that's CIVL.com, podcasting network and streaming platform that's focused on upgrading human civilization by promoting voluntarism, individual relationships, individual liberty, and of course, human respect. So very grateful to them. Tonight, our show is about technocracy, which is a recurring theme in my work, you may have noticed over the years. But we're also going to talk about freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Our first big story will be talking about my latest article, which I sort of teased a few weeks ago, and I finally had time to sit down and write it out. This is part one in a more than likely three-part, potentially four-part series called the Technocratic Trump Administration, and we'll be going through that first tonight, talking about public-private partnerships. The second story, we're going to continue our look at the expansion of the language around domestic terrorism and the first official arrest of some people associated with Antifa, the idea that this being deemed a terrorist organization despite being very decentralized, and what this means for the future, what it's going to, how it's going to affect our lives going forward. And in our third story, we'll talk about, again, another update, Trump's continued attack on media and universities. Two organizations, which I think many people in my audience and elsewhere out there in the so-called awake audience might really not have much sympathy for, like, hey, the education systems are indoctrinating my children and college kids, and the mainstream media has lied about so much, so who cares? Let Trump put all the pressure on them. But I wanted to talk about that from a nuanced perspective, as we typically do, and maybe help you think about why that's not good for us in the long term. Finally, another continuation of stories. We were kind of got a theme going tonight, picking up some threads I've been pulling. We're going to talk again about Venezuela. The majority of my show last week was all about recognizing how the language and the push for interfering in Venezuela, bombing boats in the middle of the ocean, is actually about regime change, and that this has been going on since Trump's first administration. Well, as soon as I put that out last week, there's been some new updates that are very important about covert action by the CIA potentially taking place very soon. I mean, it could be any day now in the Venezuelan area. So we're going to talk about that, and then we'll play a music video as we always do to conclude. And last week, you guys really enjoyed Alais Clay, who is the artist that ended the show. So we're going to play another Alais Clay song tonight. She's actually a good friend of mine, first an inspiration, then somebody I got to meet and perform with and interview with and talk with around, different things that we care about. And then she's actually on tour right now, going on tour with WFX in the UK and in Europe. So super stoked for her and all of the conscious fam, whether you're an artist, whether you're an activist, whatever you're about, guys. If you're here for consciousness, for raising the vibe and actually getting to truth, and most importantly, solutions, well, the Conscious Resistance is your home. We like to say that the Conscious Resistance is a true crime show for anarchists, for free thinkers, for critical thinkers, I would say, people who question the world, whether you're anarchist or not, because I do come at this as a journalist. I also talk about topics that are sometimes controversial, like the conspiracies, that I've been exploring, the pyramid of power, or ritualistic abuse of children, which is something else I've reported on. But we do it from a factual, grounded, place, and being as neutral as possible. Of course, I think, if you've heard me speak about journalism before, I think that journalism, the idea that there's anybody who's truly objective is really kind of a lie in the first place. We all choose stories we want to focus on based on our biases, our experiences, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's about putting forward your biases up front. My bias is anti-authority. I question power. I don't believe power, left, right, center, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to be skeptical of things that government and people in power say. That doesn't mean they're always lying. And of course, when they're telling the truth, I will share that. But that's where I come from, is how can I stand against these things from as open as a place as possible, as neutral as a place as possible, while also acknowledging that I have an anti-authority bias, still sticking to truth, still bringing you guys the hard-hitting facts. And that's why I'm so grateful to work with Civil, because they allow me to do that. So, all right, I will continue I will go ahead and end the introduction rant, and we'll dive right in. First off, I want to acknowledge I'm not at my desk right now. You might notice there's all kinds of stuff going on back here. I'm on the road for the next couple of weeks visiting family. So I'm here at family at my mother's house, visiting my nieces and nephews and family. And this is my mom's arts and craft room, as you might be able to tell from behind me. Nevertheless, the work must go on. So while I'm on the road, I'm going to be continuing to do my show. Now, I did have one question to put to the audience as you guys are listening to this. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments wherever you're listening from, because I will read them. And most importantly, I will take them into consideration based on your opinion. So I'm in the US right now, just got here a couple of days ago. We'll be here for 2 weeks. And I'm contemplating flying to Chicago next week to document some of the National Guard stuff going on. The reason for that is because while there's National Guard that has been in DC, and I was in DC recently, and I didn't really see much action there or anything happening, there's also been a lot of activity in Portland. That's another place I could potentially fly to. But the reason I really want to go to Chicago, what I'm most interested in, is because there are these very interesting, and I know some of you are against it, but these community defense activist networks that are coming together to communicate in a decentralized way when they spot ICE in a certain neighborhood and encouraging people to go protest, to go, express their distaste for what ICE is doing. To, in some cases, people are choosing to block the cars. And I mean, that's mainly in Oregon, Portland, really. But in some cases in Chicago, people have actually physically tried to stop ICE from arresting people, de-arresting, which, again, I know is controversial to the more conservative side of my audience, but it's something that I support. And I've talked about that for years, not just about ICE, but about anything. Like, let's say you are people who are against the COVID mandates and injections and, people being forcibly injected, which did happen in some places in the world. Well, I've said back then, and I've said before, the way to stop it is for people to get organized. And I've talked about freedom cells, the concept of mutual aid groups, decentralized groups coming together. And for the most part, we focus on freedom cells as applied to building community gardens, urban farming, opting out of the technocratic state, getting out of those systems as a group. But I also think when it comes to self-defense, groups like freedom cells and other mutual aid groups have a role to play. And so in Chicago, people are actively coming together to communicate, and in some cases trying to de-arrest people, trying to just protest and get in ICE's face, not doing any physical violence, but making it clear, hey, we don't approve of this, we're not supportive. And it's obviously controversial, and some people are going to face legal repercussions because they're not wearing masks. Facial recognition cameras on the internet and elsewhere are going to get them. But I was thinking it might be an interesting story to go document what's happening in Chicago, do like I usually do, which is just to interview all sides and to get perspectives. So I would like to know in the comments, wherever you're listening from, should I go to Chicago? Give me your answers. I'll check them over the next couple of days, and I'm going to make a decision by probably this weekend if I'm going to go and at what time it might be, because I only have a short time here in the US. And of course I could fly to Chicago from Mexico, but it's a little closer here. So I'm thinking about it. All right. And before we get into the show, I also just again want to remind you guys that I have launched a 10-week challenge with Civil on the Civil platform. So everybody who's following along already on Civil, if you guys are watching this on the Civil platform, you know what's up. And I hope you enjoyed week 1 of the challenge, which was myself last Wednesday. It started on October 15th, and it's going to be kicking off every single week every Wednesday for the next 10 weeks. Myself, John Bush, and others, we're going to keep going back. And well, actually, no, it's just going to be me and John Bush. I might have a special guest once or twice on my side of things, but for the most part, it's just going to be myself and John. Let me go ahead and show this on screen. So you can see actually right there at theconsciousresistance.com announcing the 10-week opt-out challenge. And then you can go directly to my page and learn everything you need to know. There's a full schedule here, and you can sign up. Again, the best place is civil.com/TCR. That goes through my link so that they know people are signing up through me. And then it'll take you to the opt-out challenge where you can get all the details. This week, John is going to be talking about the foundation of financial sovereignty. So right here's the list. This is Wednesday, October 22nd, Applied Counter Economics, hosted by John Bush, the 4 C's of opting out of the foundation of financial sovereignty. He's going to talk about his 4 C strategy: confidence and courage, currency, counter economics, and community. That's actually 5 C's. For real world freedom. And then next Wednesday, I'll be back talking about unbanking, why it's essential. Following week, John's going to talk about confidence and courage. And then the following week, I'll be talking about getting out of the big tech system. So this is going on for 10 weeks. You can sign up at Civil for just $5 a month, which is pretty crazy, or $50 a year. And if you do $50 a year, you can use the code TCR20 to get a 20% discount. And not only are you getting access to all this, but they have so many cool documentaries. I watched a cool documentary last week about Serge Tankian of the System of a Down, if anybody who remembers them. I haven't listened to them in years, but it's a really cool documentary about the fight for recognition of the Armenian genocide and just a lot of the things he was involved in. So links will be in the show notes. If you want to get signed up, we recommend you do so, because it's just a good opportunity to support me and support independent people like Civil who are trying to bring content that actually does elevate human civilization. And in fact, with that in mind, I want to share at theconsciousresistance.com, we're also trying to elevate human civilization and promote unity where possible. So go over here to theconsciousresistance.com. You can see our latest content here. And I've released 3 videos so far. I'm not going to play them on the show, but I encourage you guys to go check them out. I've got one more coming out on Tuesday. I went to the No Kings protest in Houston on Saturday, and the timing just happened to work out. I'm back in Houston. I figured, all right, let's go ahead. Let's do it. Let's go on. I did this back in June, and a lot of you seem to enjoy that video. And in that video, I did just, a nice 15-minute clip of different answers. This one, I wanted to actually show the full interviews because these were some interesting conversations. So far, the one I agreed with the most was this gentleman. You can see on your screen on the right side, the parties are 2 wings of the same bird. Interesting guy, definitely, I think a little mixed up in some areas, but then very, on point in others. And then this lady released the Epstein files, no matter who's in them. She was dressed as a handmaid. Again, right on some areas, and I think completely wrong in other areas. And then once again, this lady, I call this one, I Still Have Hope for Unity. She's dressed in like a blow-up duck costume, because really they were many of the costumes are about people trying to say, hey, Trump's trying to say this is a violent anti-American movement. Well, then we're going to be as silly as possible while also standing up for our rights, so that when he says things like that, he looks pretty ridiculous, if he can look even more ridiculous. And again, this lady had some interesting thoughts. I think she was kind of completely mixed up in other areas, but my whole goal with this is never to do gotcha questions. I've done those in the past, man on the street stuff, where you're trying to lead someone to a place and say, ha, but you said this thing and now you're thinking this thing. Aren't you an idiot? I don't think that's too helpful, although it's entertaining. But I do think what I've achieved here, what people tell me, that they like my skills when it comes to man on the street interviews, and they're fun for me and I do enjoy them. I've been doing them for over a decade. I think that there's an opportunity for dialogue, for conversation, for learning and understanding, especially when it comes to the so-called other side. I know that I have a mixed audience. There's some of you out there who still listen to me who are Trump supporters. Thanks for hanging on. Hopefully you'll let go of that soon. I know there's others who are just anarchists, voluntarists, and completely, post-political. And then there are others who might have some left leanings, more radical. I don't really tend to have too many Democrats listening to me, but there are people who are left leaning, but are anarchist or post-political, but more progressive, but that also question all these systems. And so it's a mixed audience, a mixed crowd. And so I'm always just trying to talk to people of all types and share my perspective. It's not that I expect or believe that you all think like I do, but obviously I'm trying to get you to convert your beliefs a little bit and challenge some of you. And the best way to do that, I think, is to talk to the people on the street and see what they think. So as I said, these are all at theconsciousresistance.com, and the last one will be coming out on Tuesday. Other thing I want to mention, I have brand new talks available at theconsciousresistance.com. My latest one, which was at the Thrive Alive Festival a few weeks back, it's called Why Exit and Build is the Answer to Our Problems. And it's kind of a part 2 of a talk I also did at Thrive Alive, which was called Why We Need a Holistic Liberation Movement. So you can find all that at theconsciousresistance.com, plus recent articles and all kinds of good stuff. So thank you guys for supporting. Let's go ahead and get into it. I know I had a long-winded intro. I've been just freewheeling here and talking about all kinds of things. But as I said, we're going to pick up on some stories we've already talked about. This is because these are, I don't want to just talk about an issue one time, Venezuela, the domestic terrorist conversation, the attack on media, and then move on and never talk to you about it again. To me, that is one of the problems with independent alternative media, is people don't let stories develop and then follow them and keep their audience informed. It's just like you talk about one thing one time and then kind of move on, and maybe that's all you say. I want to try to bring you as broad of information as possible, and at the same time bring you the conclusions when possible, at least bring you the development. So let's go ahead and get into it, everybody. Thank you for being here for The Conscious Resistance Live. All right, so this is my latest article for The Last American Vagabond. I'm done writing my books, and so I'm back to writing articles. Just finished up my memoir, finished up my part for the Pyramid of Power. So now we're back at it, guys, and I will be contributing regularly to The Last American Vagabond. This is a potentially, as I said earlier, 3 or 4 part series, the Technocratic Trump Administration, the public-private partnership. This is where I decided to start. And there's 2 main stories in here. As I mentioned before, I have covered some of these. Let me go ahead and change this setting here so you can see it better. There we go. I have covered some of these issues in the past, but it's so much happening, so much going on, that I think it does behoove each of us, and especially those who are not paying attention to the news 24/7, to kind of do a summary every now and then, or a recap of all the craziness going on, because otherwise we're maybe not just seeing how bad things really are. And I think this is a big problem with some of the Trump supporters, is that, for one, people are in their silos, so they're only listening to Rumble, pro-Trump media, whatever, but they don't read mainstream media, which I understand, because mainstream media has lied and been corrupted for a long time. But what people fail to understand is that doesn't mean mainstream media is always wrong and that everything they say is lies. In fact, there's been some good reporting calling out things Trump has been doing, and both sides. I mean, same applies the other way, right? Of people who are truly suffering from TDS and just think everybody who likes Trump is a complete racist. They don't read or listen to anything outside their little liberal progressive bubble. They also suffer from the same thing. So I'm not trying to say it's just the Trump people. The problem is really being in silos. And when you're in a silo that is only telling you pro-Trump information all the time, you're going to miss the details that I'm sharing here. So let's go ahead and do it. Again, part 1, stay tuned for part 2 this coming week, and I'll cover it on next week's show. And I just want to set the stage here for what I was just describing about how quickly things are moving. In the 10 months since Donald Trump returned to the White House, his administration has sought to rapidly implement the agenda of his technocratic and Zionist backers. The sheer onslaught of daily developments is enough to overwhelm the average American who is attempting to keep up with the constant breaking news. This should come as no surprise, given that Steve Bannon, one of Trump's first political strategists, loudly proclaimed his goal to inundate the public with, quote, shit. In 2018, Bannon told Bloomberg, "The Democrats don't matter. The real opposition is the media. And the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with shit." And then about a year later, he talked to PBS. And I found in this article, he said, "Every day we hit them with 3 things. They'll bite on one and we'll get all our stuff done. Bang, bang, bang. These guys will never be able to recover." And so you can kind of hear that even though Bannon was talking about Democrats in the media, he's in general just talking about a strategy of moving so fast that your enemy, whoever that may be, and in this case, I think it's the public, is so confused and so just like, oh my God, thrown off, that you can't even really focus on anything. And even though Bannon's not necessarily speaking in Trump's ear these days, he's not in the White House, he clearly influenced Trump's policies and a lot of the people around him, and they're still going this way. And so they're accomplishing their goals at a breakneck pace, so that not only can Trump's allies, the technocrats, get their things done as quick as possible, but the public is just overwhelmed. And this is what I was saying earlier. People are in silos, so they're listening to media that only tells them what they want to hear, but then also things are going so fast, they might not be able to keep up anyways. So as I wrote here, Trump has allied himself with technocrats running the major tech firms. This includes big technocrats, which is, by the way, a term I'm trying to get out into the vernacular. Big technocrats. Instead of just saying big tech CEOs, they're technocrats. They run big tech. They're big technocrats. Like Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg. In a 2009 interview, Zuckerberg infamously revealed that one of Facebook's so-called core values was the motto, "move fast and break things," a phrase that Zuckerberg said that meant that, quote, unless you are breaking some stuff, you're not moving fast enough. And he's talking about in terms of development and trying out new ideas when it came to big tech and to, their products. But I think in general, it's a philosophy about the way they move and act in the world. And so when you get the Bannon, move quick, and so you overwhelm your enemy with shit, and then the Zuckerberg sort of technocrat ideology of move fast or, and break things, put those two things together, you see that Trump's team is moving as fast as possible, paying a little attention to what they break, even if it includes established legal precedent or the U.S. Constitution itself. They're flooding the zone with as many actions as possible, which keeps the courts, the media, and the public struggling to keep up with their actions. So this series of articles is an attempt to recap the actions taken by the Trump administration in recent months. The steps taken by him and his allies prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Zionist technocrats are indeed running the show, and he is simply helping build the technocratic surveillance state of their dreams. Trump is simply following orders and rewarding those who stay loyal to him. The only way to dismantle this ever-growing machine is to become aware of it and then resist its advance. So let's start with public-private partnerships, which was something that I don't know if you guys can cast your minds all the way back to 2020 during the so-called COVID resistance and how many people were adamantly and vehemently against the public-private partnership concept, just as as a concept in general. And this was largely due to the resistance to the World Economic Forum and the World Economic Forum's Great Reset, which they announced in June 2020, talking about you will own nothing and be happy, lockdowns, digital IDs, all this sort of stuff. Many of people first heard about these ideas coming from World Economic Forum propaganda. And in fact, the World Economic Forum calls themselves the International Organization for Public-Private Partnership. So this is something that the so-called Awake movement and the MAGA movement have been resisting for 4 to 5 years, and many of us even before then. And now it seems to be very popular in the second Trump term, and there's not much speaking about it or resisting to it. And so just for clarity's sake, let's go ahead and define the public-private partnership, which I did so here in this article. It says that it typically involves an agreement between private companies financing government projects with the expectation that the companies will receive profits from the taxpayers. These arrangements have become increasingly common throughout the world over the last decade. And the critics of it say that this is a step towards corporatism, a system where the state has direct control of corporations. And this approach can be traced back to Benito Mussolini, who was the Italian fascist dictator who led Italy from 1922 to 1943. I'm not saying it's fascism, but it's definitely corporatism. The first sign that Trump was pursuing a corporatist strategy came in late August when the U.S. announced that they would purchase a 9.9% stake in Intel. 10% to be, make it simpler, but that's 10% stake in Intel, the struggling manufacturer of microchips. The U.S. is also going to pay $8.9 billion to Intel in exchange for this. So they're buying a 10% stake for $9 million. Where are they buying it from? The U.S. taxpayers. The government doesn't make any money. I mean, they print money, but they don't produce, they don't produce anything, do anything of value to be paid for other than try to micromanage your lives. So that 10 million came from the taxpayers, from the people, you being used to buy a 10% stake in the corporation. Now, to be fair, let's say that you support such a policy, then the people should be getting a cut, right? I mean, if the people are going to be the one whose taxpayer dollars are going to be stolen and then redistributed into a purchase of a private company for $9 million, 9 billion, billion with a B, you would think that as that company starts to profit from that deal, the people get a cut. I highly doubt that that's going to be the case, but maybe that would make things fair. I don't think it's going to happen. But this wasn't the first time this happened under Trump. A few weeks earlier before that, before the Intel deal, the Pentagon, the Department of Defense or Department of War, and MP Materials announced a, quote, transformational public-private partnership, which will see the Department of Defense become the largest shareholder in rare earth miner MP Materials. So this company mines rare earth metals, and now the Department of War, U.S. Department of War, is buying $400 million of its stock to become the largest shareholder in this company. It's another example of a company of the U.S. government going in and buying stake in a company using taxpayer dollars because, again, they don't produce anything. After this, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who I've reported on quite a bit in his connections to Jeffrey Epstein, he's a former Democratic donor to Hillary Clinton, tied to Tether, tied to so many technocratic things. I encourage you to go back and watch my previous reports. Of course, has connections to Peter Thiel as well. He said that the U.S. is considering taking equity stakes in military-industrial complex contractor Lockheed Martin. And while speaking on CNBC recently, he talked about this. He said, quote, they're thinking about it. Speaking about the U.S. government, there's a lot of talking that needs to be had about how do we finance our munitions acquisitions. There's a monstrous discussion about defense. Lockheed Martin makes 97% of their revenue from the U.S. government. They're basically an arm of the U.S. government. So he's like, well, they're pretty much an arm of the U.S. government. We might as well buy stock in them. That hasn't happened yet, but it is something being discussed. And just as recent as this month, so October, Trump announced a $35.6 million partnership with Trilogy Metals, which will make the U.S. government a 10% shareholder company in the company. Coincidentally, this is where things get a little shady, right? So they announced a $35.6 million deal with Trilogy Metals, they deal in, as you can imagine, metals, mining company. And at the same time, as they're announcing this 10% stake in the company, they're also saying, oh, by the way, we're going to authorize this 211 access road to Alaska's, it's called the Ambler Mining District. And Trilogy, the company that the U.S. government is buying stake in, is the co-owners of Ambler Metals LLC, which happens to manage some of the projects that are trying to get started. They want to mine the copper and cobalt, which is in this 400,000 acre site in Alaska. It's called the Upper Kobuk Mineral Area, mineral projects. And so Trilogy Metals, has some plans for doing some mining in this 211-mile access road in Alaska, and Trump buys stake in their company and then approves their project. And wouldn't you know it, construction on this project had previously been blocked by Joe Biden due to concerns about the environment and Native American communities in the region. So Biden puts it on hold. Trump comes in, says we're going to buy stake in the company and we're going to approve the project. I mean, this is clearly quid pro quo. And thankfully, some people are seeing it. I know many of you out there are like, Derrick, he's a good businessman, are the deal, this kind of stuff, which is just retarded in my mind. You know, sorry if that offends you. I just think it is what it is. Like, you got to recognize that if this was the other side, quote unquote, so many people would be making so much noise about this, and rightfully so. They'd see, look, like people who talk about Biden, for example, and the attempts of the Biden administration with the Burisma, the Ukraine business deal. And people were like, oh, there's clearly quid pro quo going over there, and Hunter Biden's involved. Okay, but look, this is Trump doing very similar things. He's buying stake in Trilogy Metals, buying stake in, what was the other one? MP Materials, and then Intel. And I believe there's one other company, and his commerce secretary is talking about buying stake in Palantir or maybe Boeing or Lockheed. And he's authorizing a project for one of the metal companies right after buying stock in them. I mean, there's clearly quid pro quo corruption going on here. And if we're going to be a people that actually care about trying to not have corruption in politicians and in government, which I think is probably impossible, then we need to be consistent about it. Thankfully, there are some people who are being consistent. There is some American conservatives who have actually been critical of Trump's actions. One of them would be radio host Eric Erickson. And look, I don't know anything about this guy other than what I found here, so I'm sure he's wrong in a lot of other areas. So don't take this as an endorsement of him. But after the Intel deal, he said that Trump's actions were, quote, actual socialism. He says, you can't just be against socialism when the left does it. If you're not against socialism overall, guess what? You're going to get socialism. So if you support socialism, apparently Donald Trump is your guy. Now, of course, he's not the only one. And also, it should be mentioned that this is not the first time a U.S. president has sought to buy stake or to support, using taxpayer dollars, a private company. Most famously in our lifetimes would be the 2007-2008 financial crisis, when George W. Bush and Barack Obama as presidents took partial control of General Motors, Citigroup, and AIG. And this was, of course, an attempt, we were told at least, to prevent these companies from collapsing. Too big to fail, right? So they got to bail them out with taxpayer money to keep them alive. And at that time, though, Barack and George Baby Bush justified their action. They said it was necessary to prevent a nationwide collapse. Trump's are not happening in the middle of actions are not taking place in the middle of a nationwide collapse. It's just, according to some people, him doing good business. I think if you take it with the perspective of the broader, everything we're going to cover tonight and that I've covered in my previous shows, when you really look at the totality of Trump's actions, it's clear that this is some form of sort of corporatist nationalism going on, where he wants to not totally privatize these industries, which people would tend to call socialist or corporatist at the least, but he definitely wants, in the interest of the national interest in doing good business, to have some stake in a lot of these companies. And so it's some weird amalgam of socialism and nationalism. Where have we seen that before? And yeah, just some other kind of mishmash of policies that are, I guess, are, what people would call Trumpism. The other big thing I want to talk about in this one, we're talking about public-private partnerships now. We're talking about this intersection of the big tech and, in this case, mining companies. Well, another great example was the White House meeting with big tech executives. September 4th, Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump welcomed tech industry leaders to the White House for a dinner and discussion on the future of collaboration between the American government and Silicon Valley. And I talked about this at the time, but we'll get a little deeper here. This was the White House statements after this meeting in early September, building on the Trump administration's visionary AI action plan and the First Lady's leadership to support AI education. This public-private corporate collaboration, there they say it right there, is fueling unprecedented growth in infrastructure and innovation as the U.S. leads this new frontier of scientific breakthrough. As I've previously reported on the so-called AI action plan, This is just another way that for the relationships with technocrats like Peter Thiel and Trump to get kind of more solidified. And this dinner, bringing them all together, was simply just another step in that direction of the technocratic takeover of the American government. Big tech leaders in attendance included OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, Google co-founder Sergey Brin, OpenAI President Greg Brockman, Oracle CEO Safra Catz, Apple CEO Tim Cook, Microsoft founder Bill Gates, Microsoft Chairman and CEO Satya Nadella, Alphabet Inc. and Google CEO Sundar Pichai, and of course, Mark Zuckerberg. And the fact that Trump, to me, in my mind, just think about this. I mean, I was a part of launching the so-called expose Bill Gates movement. It wasn't just me, but I was working with James Corbett and there was other people in the 2020, 2021. We were really pushing for this expose Bill Gates, telling people on, I think it was like July 2021. And then we did it a couple of times saying, go to the streets, pass out flyers, put up signs, expose Bill Gates. And at that time, it was very much focused on, of course, the COVID mandates that were beginning, the injections, and overall, just when I did a whole 3 or 4 part series for T-Lab back in the day, looking at who Bill Gates really is and his family's ties to eugenics, and not from a conspiratorial perspective, but from the true crime fact-based perspective. And it was actually pretty successful. We made the news in a few different cities. There were some pretty big actions. We did it a couple times, of course, as typically happens. By the second and the third time, it pretty much the momentum had died down. Nevertheless, my point is there's been big movements and awareness against Bill Gates for some years now, but especially among the so-called conspiracy crowd, the health freedom crowd, the anti-vaxxer crowd. And now to turn around and to find Donald Trump dining at the White House with Bill Gates it's just astounding. And the fact that there's not more resistance, more people speaking up about it, I think is quite absurd. But, you know, now MAGA, I guess, is okay with Bill Gates. Other officials in attendance included White House AI and crypto czar and technocrat David Sachs and Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles. Altogether, there were, get ready for this, 33 power plays in attendance at the dinner, and power players. And look, here's even, let me go ahead and show you this Fortune magazine, Fortune website that clearly highlighted. It said, meet all 33 Silicon Valley power players at Trump's high profile dinner. And they say it several times, hosted 33 members. There was 33 attendees. And for those who know, you know, I mean, I've talked about the power of 33 recently in terms of the Charlie Kirk shooting, how many times that one popped up. They caught him in 33 hours. So I just thought that was interesting that they're highlighting there was 33 people in attendance. And that doesn't even, that's not, the number was less of the big tech people that were invited. But when you count Trump's people like David Sachs and Susie Wiles, you get to 33. So there was 33 people at this dinner. Now, another piece of this whole collaboration with big tech and these public-private partnerships, which happened on the same day of this White House meeting, was that Donald Trump's wife, Melania Trump, hosted an AI education summit focused on integrating artificial intelligence into American schools. This is called her Presidential AI Challenge, which is calling on American youth to complete a project which involves the, quote, study, development, or use of an AI method or tool to address community challenges. So it's pretty broad, but they're just, you know, I guess if you're a kid and you're smart and you can use AI, come up with some creative idea and they might use you as propaganda tool at the White House. The challenge also asks educators to focus on, quote, creative approaches to teaching or using AI technologies in K-12 learning. Now, for some parents, they don't want any AI involved in the kids' education, even though it's a useful tool. We all know that it's still a very much evolving and growing tool that needs to be, you probably shouldn't be experimenting with it by releasing it to the public first. This whole thing doesn't make any sense to me of how, you know, you've all heard the horror stories. I've highlighted several of them on my social media about people, young kids dying, suicide after talking to AI, and the AI basically teaching one of them how to tie a noose, which way would be the best way, and some of them developing unhealthy relationships with it. Like this thing, and maybe they have done, we can more than guess, done a lot of behind the scenes testing before they released it to the public, because the public technology we get access to is typically years behind what's privately available at big tech, you know, networks or the military. Nevertheless, they're clearly allowing this thing out into the wild, and it's an experiment of how it's going to interact with our minds, with the young kids' minds, and the idea of just integrating it further into education right now. I'm not saying you shouldn't use it all. I know some will say that. Whatever, though, they need to be careful, and obviously they don't want to be careful. The continued Trump-ing of AI as a solution for the U.S. is no surprise given the Trump administration's close relationship with so many big technocrats who stand to benefit because they need to build data centers so they can power their AI models, so they can power all the things they're doing, and they need to buddy up with Trump to get it done. But the announcement of integrating AI into the American education system was not applauded by all sectors of society. You have Sasha Haworth, executive director at the Tech Oversight Project, talked about how the developments of AI, these latest developments, were not about altruism, but about how big tech companies are trying to get away and avoid any legal consequences for their products. She says, he or she, I'm not sure, Sasha, as public outrage against their lethal products continues to grow, big tech CEOs are seeking shelter behind President Trump, hoping to buy their way out of the many lawsuits and legislation coming to hold them accountable. So that could be true. All we can say for certain is that we're only 10 and a half months in Donald Trump's first year and his second term, and he is embracing public-private partnerships as a way to empower his big tech buddies. And when we understand the philosophy that guides them from people like Curtis Yarvin and others, then we should understand that having these men in power and gaining more money and more influence is not going to benefit the average American. And I don't think it's something we should just be blindly embracing. Next week, in part 2 of my series, well, actually this week I'll be publishing it, and next week I'll be going over it on the show. I'm going to talk about how Trump's working with the technocrats to consolidate control over American legacy media, as well as social media, of course, things like TikTok, but there's other areas as well where they're really trying to recreate the same things they said they were fighting, like censorship and things of that sort when it comes to social media, as well as gaining more control of the corporate media, which we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. But yeah, you can find this article, my friends, at thelastamericanvagabond.com. Again, I'm back to writing weekly articles over there, and I will have that in the show notes for anybody who wants to check it out. All right, so the next story we're going to pick up here is just a short one. It's just going to be a brief update on our look at the domestic terror claims. And I've been warning the past few weeks about how these domestic terror accusations, and really for years, how calling your political enemies domestic terrorists, domestic extremists is a race to the bottom. It's not going to go anywhere good. And this is now the latest movement is Donald Trump kind of designating Antifa a terrorist organization, domestic terror organization, which there's no legal definition for yet in the United States. So that's already on some shaking territory. It's going to have to eventually get to the courts. But what's going to happen in the meantime? How many people are going to, be rounded up or locked up? This is just a couple of days ago. Democracy docket. DOJ brings first terror charges under Trump's Antifa order. A federal grand jury Thursday charged 2 men with terrorism-related offenses over their alleged involvement in an attack on an immigration detention center in Texas earlier this summer. Now, you might have heard about this one. This was definitely a pretty crazy story. The charges are the first time the DOJ has sought and secured terrorism charges citing the President Donald Trump's executive order, which designates the anti-fascist Antifa movement as a domestic terrorist organization. Pam Bondi announced the charges on social media, saying that this proves Antifa is a left-wing terrorist organization. They will be prosecuted as such. So, just again, that language is being used. Now, I want to say in this particular case, there's clear evidence of violent intent. And based on the group's private messages and public stances, you could argue that they were trying to cause political terrorism. And terrorism is, of course, the effort to instill fear or terror in the public. And you could sometimes be a terrorist with no specific political message. In this case, they clearly do have a political message. So on one hand, it does fit the bill. I don't think we should be allowing the government to be focused on domestic terrorism. But I think that this is at least a case that you could say it fits what they're claiming that they're going after. And at the same time, I still think it's going to be used to kind of normalize this, that the government could start rounding people up and saying they're domestic terrorists. And as I talked about last week, knowing what we know about the FBI's involvement in entrapping people and claiming Muslims and people from brown-skinned people from around the world are terrorists, we've seen that plenty of times. And if we allow them to just do that without any kind of repercussions, well, it could get pretty bad, guys. So we need to be paying attention to that. We need to make sure that we don't just normalize that sort of thing, even if in this first case, it does seem like the people probably fit the bill of terrorists. Cameron Arnold of Dallas and Zachary Evans of Waxahachie, Texas, were among several people arrested over a July 4th shooting outside an immigration and Customs Enforcement facility in Alvarado, Texas, during which a police officer suffered a non-fatal shot in the neck. For their alleged roles in the shooting, they are charged with providing material support to terrorists, attempted murder of federal officers, and firearms offenses. Under U.S. law, providing general support to terrorists is legally distinct from knowingly supporting a designated foreign terrorist organization. The two actions are prosecuted under different statutes that have separate conviction requirements. It says here, the indictment alleges that the two men were part of a North Texas Antifa cell. This is where things might get a little bit shady and uncertain, but we'll have to see what they actually provide in court as evidence. The document claims that Antifa is a, quote, militant enterprise made up of a network of individuals in small groups, primarily ascribing to a revolutionary anarchist or autonomous Marxist ideology that seeks to overthrow the U.S. government. One of the attorneys said that he had not seen evidence to support the terrorism charges and believes the DOJ brought them for political reasons. This is the defense attorney of one of the defendants. Trump signed this Antifa executive order earlier this year, of course. So it goes on. And I will include this article, but I also do have a link to the actual court filing here, the indictment. Late on 4th of July, 2025, a North Texas Antifa cell of at least 11 operatives clad in black and donning masks, some of whom were wearing body armor and carrying firearms, attacked the Prairie Land Detention Center in Alvarado, Texas. The DHS was using Prairie Land to house illegal aliens awaiting deportation. Members of the Antifa cell began shooting fireworks toward the facility and vandalizing vehicles and a guard shed. Alarmed at the presence of people near the facility late at night, correctional officers inside went outside to investigate. Other DHS personnel called local police. Within minutes, an officer from the Alvarado Police Department arrived on the scene, stepping out of his cruiser and began issuing commands to a black-clad figure running towards another black-clad figure holding a rifle. One Antifa member, co-conspirator number 1, yelled, "Get to the rifles." Seconds later, co-conspirator 1 opened fire on the officers, striking the Alvarado police officer in the neck area as the unarmed correctional officers ducked and ran for cover. The wounded officer fell to the ground but was able to return a few shots. Co-conspirator 1 continued to fire additional rounds until his rifle jammed. The attackers then left the scene. Police arrested most of the Antifa cell shortly after the attack, many near the scene, including Zachary Evitz. Police arrested Cameron Arnold the following day. And so that was kind of just describing the scene. And this is where they start to describe Antifa, the group, as a, Antifa cell, and says that most of the people look to co-conspirator 1 as the leader. He trained them on firearms and close quarter conduct. They were heavily armed, allegedly this cell was, with 50 firearms that they purchased in Fort Worth, Grand Prairie, Dallas, and elsewhere. Co-conspirator 1 bought and built numerous AR rifles, some of which he distributed to his co-defendants, and at least one which featured a binary trigger, which allowed the device to fire more rapidly. They used an encrypted messaging app to coordinate with each other. Now, they don't say what app is, and this is I hate that they never talk about which app it is, because, I'm not surprised. They don't want the people to understand which apps they're able to access. They do claim, as you'll see here in a moment, that they weren't able to get all the information because of this encrypted app, so they probably don't want to tell us that. But nevertheless, I've seen many court cases where the judges and the police seem to have access to so-called encrypted information, during trials and during cases, which indicates that, the encryption isn't working, I guess. It just says here that some of these apps allow for group chats and had auto delete or delete after defined time functions, which cause communications among the Antifa cell to be permanently deleted. Most Antifa cell members use monikers in the chat groups to further hide their true identities. And it said using the messaging app, they planned and coordinated the attack. Their goal was to destroy the U.S. government property and commit acts dangerous to human life, intended to influence the U.S. policy of the U.S. government and affect government conduct by intimidation and coercion. As one member stated in an encrypted chat, "I'm done with peaceful protests and blue lives don't matter." Now, again, these are all accusations. So are these real? Potentially. I think there are definitely people being radicalized and who are believing in these things, and this is not a good direction, whether it's left or right wing groups. But this also doesn't mean that the challenge and the danger is only coming from the left. Some Antifa cell members discussed logistics, previous site reconnaissance, and locations of security cameras. They exchanged a map of the area, surrounding areas. They planned what materials to bring, including firearms, medical kits, and fireworks. One group said they would be bringing a wagon to hold armors and rifles. Co-conspirator 1 told the group they would use rifles to intimidate law enforcement, saying cops are not trained or equipped for more than one rifle, so it tends to make them back off. They staged at a house on the evening of the planned attack. They were dressed in black bloc. They brought a total of 10 firearms, and it goes on. And then some of the pages left blank. So they're being charged. So yeah, this is, I think, again, maybe a case that actually does fit the bill of what some might define as domestic terrorists. But either this is a false flag and they're using it as justification to kind of see, look, we're justified in calling Antifa terrorists, and now we need to pass all these other laws, or it's real because people are being radicalized, not only because there are shitty things Trump's doing, but because people are idiots and thinking that going and bombing an ICE facility is somehow going to lead to liberty or freedom in some way. Nevertheless, it's going to be used against us. We can bet that without a doubt. I mean, that's just, it's going in that direction. Unfortunately, people are playing right into this whole domestic terror stuff with ICE and with the U.S. government. And I don't see how it's going to get any better if people keep playing the game. I really don't, my friends. All right, let's pick it back up with the next story. Our continued look about the ways that Donald Trump is going after the media and free speech. And as I said a couple moments ago, this weekend, next week, my next piece in my series about the Technocratic Trump Administration is going to look at some of this attack on the Pentagon press corps, and then, of course, different things that Trump is doing to try to intimidate and consolidate the media. And what I think is really sad about this, let me just digress for a moment. What I think is really sad about this is that because of the obvious deficiencies, the obvious guilt of the corporate mainstream, or as I prefer, deadstream media, not too many people have sympathy for them. So when Trump does something which is shown to us in the form of, look, Trump's making fun of the mainstream media, he's attacking them in this different way. A lot of so-called truthers, freedom fighters, just justice activists, whatever you want to call yourself, are like, yeah, look, Trump's really sticking it to the man. He's sticking it to the corporate deadstream mainstream media. And it's like we celebrate that as if it's a win for us. On one hand, again, it does feel good to see somebody call out the corporate media, but that doesn't mean where he's saying, and we need to embrace the independent media. Sure, he will embrace MAGA independent media, the mainstream alternative media, and invite them to the White House for Epstein binders, or to hold an Antifa roundtable. But those people are all pretty much, I consider, propagandists. Nick Sorter, Andy Ngo, these other people, maybe they've done a good thing here or there, but for the most part, they're just establishment hacks that just repeat the mainstream establishment talking points. So Trump can kind of speak against the corporate media, and then he's like, see, and then we're going to welcome in the independent media, which is really just pro-Trump media. And for all we know, based on recent leaks from WikiLeaks and elsewhere, these people could be the folks that are getting paid $7,000 per post to promote pro-Israel things. The point is, I don't think we should get stuck in this dichotomy or this binary of, we know the corporate media is up to no good. So when Trump attacks media and the freedom of press and the freedom of speech, we celebrate it like it's a good thing for us, because that's not necessarily the case. And this Pentagon story, I think, is a great example, because if you haven't heard, I've been covering it, but if you just missed it somehow, Trump's Department of War, again, that's what they want to call it, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of the Pentagon, has announced and is now implementing new measures for the Pentagon. And they say this is to reduce leaks. They were talking about wanting to make journalists take lie detector tests. They were limiting access to where the journalists could go. And again, I've said this last week. On one hand, I understand from their perspective, of course, they're not going to let people roam the building because they don't want people to develop sources. They don't want people to talk to military officials. They don't want them to do their job. And so there's always this push and pull from the empire that wants to suppress the truth, and the people and the press that's trying to get the press out, right? I get the truth out. So of course, they're going to try to limit what people have access to. But generally speaking, as this article here, the last days of the Pentagon press corps, from The Atlantic says, I've been evicted from a building I've covered for 18 years. I'll keep doing my job anyway. This is from a reporter at The Atlantic, and just describing the last couple of days as they were packing up their bags and their boxes and leaving after a 21-year career at she talked to a police officer who'd been there for 21 years. She'd been there for 18 years. So there's been this history, this precedent set since the 60s, of having the media in the Pentagon and having a space where the media could broadcast live from and could ask questions. And of course, leaks are going to happen. That's the nature of good journalism, is people develop sources. They get the sources to talk to them off the record, on the record, and the government whines about it and tries to find ways to shut people up. So there is that cat and mouse push and pull game. But now that Pete Hegseth is kind of stepping in the way of that and making it more official and saying you have to sign this, essentially a loyalty oath, saying you're not going to talk about things we don't give you permission to talk about. So that means even unclassified information. Let's say that one of the journalists did sign this and they decide to stay in the Pentagon, and then some soldier or general or secretary or somebody in the Pentagon has some information they want to leak, which is good for truth, maybe not good for the military. And people getting this thing confused, thinking that they're the military. And so if leaks are bad for the military, they must be good for the people. No, we want to hold the military and these so-called leaders' feet to the fire. And we do that by getting the truth out, whether they like it or not. So whenever they're trying to have these journalists sign loyalty oaths saying they're not going to report on things that are, not approved, well, then they're basically silencing the truth in the future and into the coming generations. So the vast majority of all the journalistic outlets that were at the Pentagon said no. In fact, the only journalistic outlet that said yes was One America News, which, again, I'm sure they've reported on a couple of good things here and there, but come on, by and large, they are pro-Trump media. And so, of course, they're like, yeah, we'll sign some loyalty oath. But the vast majority of the mainstream media and any remaining independent media did not sign this measure and is now out of the Pentagon. And so what repercussions will this have, guys? I don't know. I encourage you to read this short article, again, with the caveat that she's a mainstream journalist, so you might not agree with everything she says, but just hear the experience of what a journalist is saying, that these sort of unprecedented actions that Trump is taking. You don't need to be left or right to fit in those bubbles to see that that's not a good thing, guys. Think about what stories might not be reported in the future because either the military is now more afraid to try to leak things, or they have less access to journalists in general because the journalists aren't in the building anymore. And as she talks about here too, she says that some of the claims Pete Hegseth made, surprise, surprise, were overblown and just not true. Like the idea that the media was just roaming through every single hall and every building, every room in the building. She says that's just never been the case in her 18 years there, that there always have been some restrictions, but yes, they have the ability to move around and to interact with people. And that can lead to relationships, and that can lead to sources, and that can lead to information getting to the public, which is so desperately needed. Unfortunately, now with the steps Trump is taking, that's not likely to happen, my friends. That's, I don't see how this is going to end up good for any of us. I don't see why anybody would be out there embracing this or celebrating it. I don't know. It just seems like this is going to be a step headed in the wrong direction. Let's continue talking about steps in the wrong direction. Unfortunately for tonight, we got quite a few of those. We're going to talk about the attack on the universities. Now, let me take you back a couple months ago to July 23rd, this article from Politico. Columbia University settles its costly battle with the Trump administration. The Ivy League school agrees to pay $200 million to settle investigations into alleged violations of civil rights. And of course, this is related to Columbia allowing the anti-Israel protest, which Trump and others framed as pro-Hamas protest. So the administration at Columbia said, Columbia's reforms are a roadmap for elite universities that wish to I think this is a Trump official saying this. Columbia's reforms are a roadmap for elite universities that wish to regain the confidence of the American public by renewing their commitment to truth-seeking, merit, and civil debate. I believe they will ripple across the higher education sector and change the course of campus culture for years to come. So first of all, they're framing this as if, because so many people, again, understandably, just like they're against the mainstream corporate deadstream media, they're against universities. Like these universities are introducing LGBTQ plus transgender stuff and pro-vaccine this and progressive ideology and Marxism this. They're infecting the youth's minds. So people don't have a lot of sympathy for the college universities. Now there's truth to that, but it's not complete truth. I think it's a biased truth, but there is some truth to that. Just like all education system, in case you didn't realize, the indoctrination doesn't start at college. It starts from the first day you put your kid in a public education system, FYI. But the Trump administration alleges that Columbia had become a hotbed of anti-Semitism and failed to protect Jewish students and faculty. though many in the campus community and beyond view the administration's response as infringing on academic freedom and free speech. The university, which has lost 2 presidents during the actions, said it does not admit to wrongdoing as part of the settlement, but it said in the statement that it, quote, affirmed the institution's leaders have recognized repeatedly that Jewish students and faculty have experienced painful and unacceptable incidents and that reform was and is needed. So they frame this like because of the quote unquote pro-Hamas protests, the Jewish students were hurt and they felt isolated. And again, maybe some people did feel that way. That doesn't mean that you got to get the freaking university to bend the knee. Trump sues all these different universities, basically saying comply. And I talked about this months ago, how part of the deals that they're making with them is also kind of controlling their speech, saying that the Trump administration gets to help them develop curriculum and policies to make sure that it's friendly to Jewish students. It's obviously something that benefits the Zionist lobby. Columbia has an endowment of more than $14 billion, significantly larger than the vast majority of universities in the country, but small in comparison to Harvard, which has more forcefully rebuked the administration's demands. The $400 million in frozen federal funding had already sharply restrained the university's ability to conduct research. So that's the other thing is, besides threats, the Trump administration's like, well, you want that federal funding we give you guys for research? Well, then bend the knee to us, say you're going to, you're sorry, and turn pro-Israel. So the $221 million in settlements was a substantial cost, but the school had said that they had not only had $400 million in grants frozen, but that the majority of its $1.3 billion in annual federal funding placed on hold. So again, they're holding them hostage. The prospect of that continuing indefinitely, along with the potential loss of top scientists, would jeopardize our status as a world-leading research institution. So they held them in the grip and basically said comply or you'll lose your money and lose your funding. And part of that, of course, is they tried to coerce them in different ways. Now, here's a more recent up-to-date one. This is coming from the New York Times the last couple of days. Universities are standing up to Trump. A White House proposal for special funding treatment crossed the line for several schools. Some say it feels like a turning point in the federal government's battle with higher education. Let's just take a quick look at this one. A White House proposal for special funding treatment crossed the line for several schools. Says the White House is confronting academia's most forceful pushback to its quest to remake the American higher education system as top universities reject its proposal to reward schools that embrace Trump's priorities. On campuses and in Washington, professors and policymakers alike are weighing whether Trump, who has reveled his campaign to upend higher education, has finally overreached. For months, his campaign faced only sporadic resistance, but over the last week, Brown University, MIT, the University of Pennsylvania, and the University of Southern California have all rebuffed the White House push to give preferential funding treatment to schools that show allegiance to Trump's agenda. Brown's decision is a case study of how the White House may have misjudged its own strength and academia's nerve, especially once one of Trump's aides said that 9 schools initially chosen to consider the proposal were, quote, good actors. After Trump's officials abruptly moved to shut off federal money in April, Brown settled with them. So this is the kind of difference. This is what they mean by this is a good case study. Because first, Brown complies, like I was just showing you a moment ago, Columbia did. But when the Trump administration returned this month and asked the school to consider its ideology for funding compact, it refused to sign. Think about that, an ideology for funding. They wanted them to sign this agreement after they had already said, okay, we'll settle with you for millions of dollars. They came back and said, okay, we'll sign this agreement too, saying that you're not going to promote certain ideologies or you're going to support ideology and you'll get funding. But Raya Gupta, a Brown freshman who helped organize opposition to the proposal on the campus in Providence, Rhode Island, said, the compact itself just so egregiously and blatantly violated our ability to function as the institution that we are right now that it is very easy for people to get fired up about it. Previously, Harvard had only been the only school to defy the Trump administration, refusing a list of demands that were intrusive enough that even some of the university's critics said the school had no feasible choice but to push back. Harvard sued soon and won a crucial ruling just last month. In case you hadn't heard that, some of them are actually beating Trump in court. The schools that have rejected Trump's compact, his agreement, may very well be risking Washington's wrath since Trump has proved willing to attack federal funding, as we were just talking about. But this agreement represents an effort to immunize the administration's efforts from court challenges and to make its ambitions take him well beyond one single school. And so what it means by that is if they can get people to sign an agreement and basically say, no, we are not resisting you in any way, anything like that, well, then you can't sue because you sign an agreement saying, no, I'm going to abide by this. I agree to an ideology for funding compact, as they're calling it. And that sort of preempts their ability to sue later and say, we were compelled, we were coerced to do this. The demands also reach farther with conditions that include accepting that academic freedom is not absolute. So that's one thing. Academic freedom is not absolute, which, again, we could argue the merits of and debate like the things that the college professors are even teaching. I think college and that time in your life is supposed to be a time where you're confronted with all kinds of ideas. That doesn't mean that campuses should be hard left or hard right. I mean, I get it. Some private universities, they have their own thing going on. But for the most part, public universities funded with public money, they should be allowed to teach all kinds of ideas and ideas that conflict. But instead, universities, of course, have become mainly left-wing progressive places. And I understand that's a problem, but the answer is not to get the government to be in charge of those universities now and to force them to, allow them to dictate educational curriculum. That's not going to be a good step either way. And pledging to potentially shut down, quote, institutional units that purposely punish, belittle, and even spark violence against conservative ideas. So there they are, specifically making it clear they're trying to defend so-called conservative ideas. Like I said, I don't think they should be supporting left or right ideas. They should be considering and promoting the discussion of all ideas. The document also envisions limits on international students, tuition freezes, an embrace of standardized testing, and definitions of genders according to, quote, reproductive function biological processes. So look, again, I know there are things out there you guys would say, good, Derrick, they're trying to get rid of all the trans garbage at my kids', universities, or, because so they don't indoctrinate the kids and then send them out into the world. I can agree with you on that. But it's not the government's job. We should not allow the government, and especially Trump, to start using these sort of backroom deals and the financial funding to threaten them and what they do. Now, at the same time, I would be happy if all of the funding of these types of institutions ended, if it meant less taxpayers were being stolen from, and they can get private funding if they want to fund their universities. But still, I don't think the government should be the ones to dictate what is being taught at these places. I'm kind of against all of it. I'm against the indoctrination happening at the college universities. I'm also against the indoctrination that the Trump administration is trying to do by forcing their own ideologies and their own views into there and using taxpayer money, federal funding to dangle it over these universities' heads and say, do what we say, or, you're not going to be able to continue. In my mind, these are really open mob tactics. I talked about this last week with Tom Homan over there in the Border Patrol, how he's accused of taking a $50,000 bribe from undercover FBI agents. And that story is not really being discussed most places. But it's like these people are just operating like mafioso members. They're just doing whatever the hell they want. And not to say that the other side doesn't as well. But I mean, I think Trump has taken it, and his team have taken it to a more open place than we've ever seen. And this is why I can't understand why so many of you out there who claim to be libertarian, freedom lovers, things like that, can just see what's happening and not actively try to push back or stop it. Or you just make fun of, the silly liberals and their stupid No Kings protests. They look at them, they believe in trans this, or look at them, they're acting fools, or whatever. People are just still stuck in that left-right paradigm, including the people I talked to at the No Kings protest, by the way. Many of them are. But if you're just honest and neutral and not falling for propaganda from the left or right, it's clear to see that both sides act as mafias, as cartels, as criminal cartels. Trump and his team are just making it more out in the open than ever. And I guess maybe in one way that's a positive, because you can kind of say, well, the mask is being ripped off. It's all out in the open now. But at the same time, nobody seems to be resisting. In fact, the people like some of you out there that I thought cared and were the resistance movement seem to be actually embracing it now, instead acting like Trump is a good guy or something. It blows my mind, but nevertheless, we got one more story to cover. We'll be right back. All right. I want to remind you guys to go to civil.com/TCR. Civil.com. That's CIVL.com/TCR. Guys, this is the best place where you can sign up for Civil and let them know that you support my work, you support what they're doing. Want to remind you again, we're hosting this 10-week opt-out challenge that started last week, October 15th, continues this Wednesday night with John Bush. As they wrote here, My part is 5 weeks. The total thing is 10 weeks. Over 5 weeks, journalist Derrick Broze will break down how individuals who value privacy stay free in a world requiring digital IDs for work and travel. How do those who stand for individual liberty and human respect maintain such principles in a world of constant biometric surveillance? And you can sign up for $5 a month, $50 a year. Use the code TCR20, TCR20 if you want to get a 20% discount code. By the way, that's only temporary. That code is not going to be lasting forever into the future. So I encourage you to make use of it right now. It's a pretty good deal. $50 a year minus 20%. You get access to the 10-week challenge. You get access to all of the Pyramid of Power, including the final episode coming next month, November. You'll be the first to watch it on Civil for 5 weeks before it goes public at the end of the year. We're also got a new documentary coming out called Liberation 2030, and they have a whole host, a library of all kinds of other awesome content that is worth your time and attention. And all you have to do is pay $5 a month or $50 a year, use the 20% code TCR20 and enjoy it. And again, the website, civil.com/TCR. That'll be linked wherever you're watching in the show notes. Okay. My final story of the night is picking up this thread about Venezuela. Now, I'm sad to say that I was correct, that literally as soon as I finished the show yesterday, this first was reported October 7th. So I actually didn't even see this till after my show, but it was confirmed elsewhere in the New York Times, as we'll show you right here, on October 15th. So just a couple of days after I recorded last week's show, that the Trump administration is giving the Department of Justice alleged legal authority. I say alleged because I don't think they actually have it, but they're claiming it, to strike cartels, a secret list of cartels. Now, we've already seen this in some cases, as you can see on screen for those who are watching, incidents like this where they're shooting these small boats in the middle of the water and blowing them up. And they, as of today, as I'm recording, I believe the number is at 7. Here, let's go ahead and use CIA Google real quick. We'll do this live. Trump boat strikes. Let's just see that. I think there was another one today. Trump administration strikes a 7th alleged drug boat, killing 3. That was yesterday, CBS News. Fact-checking Trump's claim that each boat striked off Venezuela's coast. Now, yeah, let's look at this. He claimed that for every strike, he's saving like 200,000 Americans or something like that. Let's see what it actually says. And then I saw over here too. Yeah, saves 25,000 lives. Now, I don't know how he could even prove that, but we'll deal with that later. I'll just put that in the show notes for people who want to know. You could see this right here. I mean, this is a hot button topic right now. Washington Post just published 3 minutes ago. Could Trump's boat strikes turn into war? This is a question many people are asking about. Okay, well, let's dig into this. As I said, last week I was warning you that these boat strikes and this claims that the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, who is not a hero and is not somebody I stand by or anything like that, but they're claiming he's directly involved with the cartels who are shipping the drugs on, sending them up on the boats, and that they have to stop these boats in international waters off by the Caribbean and blow them up. Otherwise, as Trump said over here, it could lead to the deaths of 25,000 Americans because they're claiming they're bringing fentanyl. So far, the U.S. government has provided no public evidence. Nothing in court has been filed to even provide for the 7 boats that have been killed. And there's been, I think, 5 to 10 men on each of them. So they're getting close to having killed 100 people without congressional approval, without a declaration of war, in international waters, violating all these different things that we could go on about, not to mention the Constitution. And they have provided no actual evidence. They're just saying, trust me, I promise you, these are bad guys doing bad things. And so that was already problematic enough. And what I was telling you last week is what the real rationale is about marching towards beating the war drums towards war with Venezuela and towards going in and, violating Venezuela's sovereign territory. So we had this from CNN on October 7th, classified Justice Department opinion authorizes strike on secret list of cartels. Now the headline there doesn't really get to the point of the matter. That I think the New York Times headline is a little better. Trump administration authorizes covert CIA action in Venezuela. The development comes as the U.S. military is drawing up options for the president to consider, including possible strikes inside the country. And Nicolas Maduro has been warning, he's been putting out videos saying, this is about war, they're coming for us. They're also getting all their people and their militias ready. War drums are beating, guys, and I hate to say it, but it seems like we're more than likely going to witness the U.S. invading Venezuela in some way. It might not be full on, boots on the ground right away, at least, but there's definitely going to be some sort of covert action, probably involving Navy SEALs and boats and maybe the Coast Guard and others. So the first report, let's see, the Trump administration has produced a classified legal opinion that justifies lethal strikes against a secret and expansive list of cartels and suspected drug traffickers. The opinion, which was produced by the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel and has not been previously reported, says that the president is allowed to authorize a deadly force against a broad range of cartels because they pose an alleged imminent threat to Americans. The list of cartels goes beyond those the administration has publicly designated as terrorist organizations. The opinion is significant because it appears to justify an open-ended war against a secret list of groups, giving the president power to designate drug traffickers as enemy combatants and have them summarily killed without legal review. Historically, those involved in drug trafficking were considered criminals with due process rights, which means that they have to be brought before a court. You don't just kill them and blow them up in international waters, with the Coast Guard interdicting drug trafficking vessels and arresting smugglers. That's how things have previously been handled. And by the way, Trump said that he can't trust the Coast Guard. He's like, we've been trying that for 30 years. It's not working. So we have to start bombing them. And so he's basically just not having much faith in the Coast Guard and his own people, and trying to use that as an excuse to claim that the bombing is necessary. You had Sarah Harrison, former associate general counsel at the Defense Department, who now works as a senior analyst at the Crisis Group, said, quote, "If this opinion authorizing strikes on cartels is as broad as it seems, it would mean DOJ has interpreted the president to have such extraordinary powers that he alone can decide to prosecute a war far broader than what Congress authorized after the attacks on 9/11. So this goes even further than 9/11. She also continued, by this logic, any small, medium, or big group that is trafficking drugs into the U.S., the administration could claim it amounts to an attack against the U.S. and respond with lethal force. That is not a good thing, but I feel like so many of you out there are going to freaking support it. The Defense Department's memos to lawmakers last week outlining the legal basis for a series of strikes leaned heavily on this opinion, sources say. Lawmakers have repeatedly asked the DOJ and the DOD for a copy of the legal opinion as recently as last week, but so far they have not provided to Congress. So not even congressional lawmakers, the people you allegedly vote to represent you, the people you vote to who claim they're going to represent you, they haven't even seen this. And so now, first it was reported on by CNN, now it's being reported by the New York Times. They're making it more clear. This could allow for covert action against Maduro and CIA. By the CIA. The Trump administration secretly authorized the CIA to conduct covert action in Venezuela, according to U.S. officials. This is the latest step in the Trump administration's intensifying pressure campaign against Venezuela. As I said earlier, they've been building up. They've got boats off the coast of Venezuela. They're doing military exercises. They're killing people. So they're claiming the most recent boat killing number, 27 people. This was as of 15th, so 5 days ago. I think that number would be higher now. So we're probably looking closer. I said close to 100 earlier. Looks like we're closer to 30 or 40, maybe probably closer to 40. The new authority would allow the CIA to carry out lethal operations in Venezuela and conduct a range of operations in the Caribbean. The agency would be able to take covert action against Maduro or his government either unilaterally or in conjunction with the larger military operation. It is not known whether the CIA is planning any operations in Venezuela or if the authorities are meant as a contingency. But the development comes as the U.S. military is planning its own possible escalation, drawing up plans for Trump to consider, including strikes inside Venezuela. So there's currently 10,000 U.S. troops in the region. Most of them are in bases in Puerto Rico. And I've talked to some folks from there as well who have been really frustrated that the U.S. military is using their home country, which is part of the U.S., for those of you out there who still don't realize that, as the sort of staging ground. And I think Puerto Rico has long been like a puppet of the military, unfortunately. And so they've got 10,000 troops there. The Navy has 8 surface warships and a submarine in the Caribbean very close as well. And these new authorities, which are known as a presidential finding, were described by multiple U.S. officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss the highly classified document. Trump ordered an end to talks with Maduro this month, and he says basically that we're not doing any more diplomatic stuff. So they're building up. I mean, he can see what's happening. They're bringing boats, they're bringing troops over there very close. They're, talking with the CIA about launching strikes. They're blowing up boats in the middle of the water. And, the CIA, as this article talks about, it does have a history of interfering in Latin America and Central America, and it's not a good history. And so I would blame people like Marco Rubio, as well as the CIA director, John Ratliff, who are all part of this sort of network that wanted to get rid of Maduro and are working with the intelligence apparatus to do so. The U.S. has also offered $50 million for information leading to his arrest and his conviction. So yeah, I don't think this is going to go away, my friends. And let me give you a little more details here. Trump actually responded to the whole, once this information has come out public, this is what he said. We have a lot of drugs coming in from Venezuela, and a lot of the Venezuelan drugs come in through the sea. So you get to see that, but we're going to stop them by land also. He didn't say that they're going to get rid of Maduro necessarily, but he said, I think Venezuela is feeling the heat. I think there are a lot of other countries feeling the heat too. We're not going to let this country, our country, be ruined by people because other people want to drop, as you say, their worst. And he's talking about them emptying their prisons and mental institutions, which they have not provided evidence for, despite so many of you out there believing it and repeating it. Shortly after Trump's remarks, Venezuela's foreign minister Yvonne Gil said that they reject Trump's warmongering and extravagant statements, calling that a violation of international war. They said, we view with extreme alarm the use of the CIA as well as military deployments announced in the Caribbean, which amount to a policy of aggression, threat, and harassment against Venezuelan. And Maduro said that he condemned the U.S.'s discriminatory and xenophobic statements comparing Venezuelans to Tren de Aragua, which he said had been eradicated in Venezuela. So at this point, I think the concerns about Tren de Aragua, whether they're real, which some are real, it's definitely being amplified and exaggerated to push for war in the same way that they say they've got weapons of mass destruction. Now he's like, he's funding a gang. We got to go in there and do everything we can to get rid of him. And Maduro said, not war, yes, peace. That's what his message was to the American people. Again, I'm not saying this guy's a hero, but he clearly doesn't want war. He clearly doesn't want to be the next Gaddafi or the next Saddam Hussein. Now, most recently, we found out that one of the bombings that took place at the boats, they actually didn't kill everybody. 2 people survived. This was on Thursday. It was a military strike in the Caribbean, and 2 of the men actually survived. You guys have seen that, the crazy bombings that have taken place. Somehow 2 of them survived and made it through. Well, the U.S. government wasn't quite sure what to do with them because since they know they're on shaky legal ground, they can't necessarily just take these men who, for one, it hasn't been tested in U.S. courts or international law if what they're doing is legal. Most likely it's not legal. You have to remember that the U.S. policies that they've been doing of drone bombing people around the world, from Bush to Obama to Trump, has never been taken to the Supreme Court. And now that same legal argument, though, is being used to say that they can bomb, kill gang members and drug cartel members, alleged cartel members anywhere in the world. Well, so because they don't even know if they're on legal ground, once they blew up one of the bombs and they realized 2 men survived, they had them in their possession. And they're like, okay, well, can we hold these men? What are the costs that are going to come? Is this going to harm international relations? And so ultimately, the Trump administration decided to let them go. He said that it was a great honor. Trump said it was a great honor to destroy a submarine with 4 known narco-terrorists on board. Of course, they didn't identify them. At least 25,000 Americans would die if I allowed this submarine to come ashore. The 2 surviving terrorists are being returned to their countries of origin, Ecuador and Colombia, for detention and prosecution. Under my watch, the United States of America will not tolerate narco-terrorists trafficking illegal drugs by land or sea. So in this, they actually gave the name. It says Jason Orlando Abando Perez, 34, was named as a survivor, returned to Colombia from the country's Interior Minister Armando Benedetti. He said he arrived with brain trauma, sedated, drugged, breathing with a ventilator. Benedetti said, adding that he had received medical attention. Benedetti called Perez a criminal who will face justice for drug trafficking. So they're at least agreeing with Trump's first assessment. Ecuador's Ministry of the Interior said Saturday that it received one of the survivors. They said that he's being medically evaluated, that the corresponding legal process will follow. They haven't given any further notice. As CNN reported on Saturday, the U.S. was considering releasing the survivors to their home countries. They were scrambling of what to do with them. The first known survivors of the military strikes carried out in the Caribbean. The U.S. detained them after the initial strike, and then, as I said, they weren't sure what to do with them. The potential was going to set up a the situation was going to potentially set up a legal and policy dilemma for the administration because it was unclear under what legal authority the U.S. military can hold prisoners. One of the sources told CNN that legally dubious situation is why the administration was considering releasing the individuals from U.S. military custody. The administration has produced a classified legal opinion, which we just described, saying that they're justified in going after drug traffickers and people of that sort. So this seems like it's going to continue, guys. I do think the war drums are beating and we're getting closer to conflict with Venezuela. Not we, it's not me, it's Donald Trump, it's his people. I hate that when people personalize and say we as if we're the government. I'm not the government. I'm not the military. I'm not bombing anybody. You're not bombing anybody. Hopefully not. So we need to put the blame with them. It's not on us. But I do think we're headed towards, the U.S. is headed towards a war with these people. And unless there's a large resistance movement, which even then, who knows what would happen, then it's definitely going to go forward, unfortunately, my friends. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. Very much appreciate you guys. Hopefully, you will check out the stories in the show notes. I want to remind you, this is an interactive show. I do read all the comments. I watch the live show along with you, even though I pre-record. And I'm not doing this just to hear myself speak or because I think I've got all the answers. I'm doing this to connect with those of you out there who care about the future of the world and the coming 7 generations. If you find value in what I do, make clips of my show, guys. Take clips of it, put it on your favorite social media platforms. Take the clips I put on social media, download them, repost them, do whatever you want. Take audio versions, video versions of this, share the stories that I'm putting in the show notes. Help me get this information in front of more people because I truly do care about where things are headed. I think that there's a war on the horizon. The technocracy is growing on the home front. The push for domestic terrorism is growing on the home front. Things are not looking good. And yet I'm still out here, and I hope you are out there trying to connect with people, trying to find that common ground so we can build the better world that I think we all know is necessary and is possible. But it's going to take effort. It's going to take time, energy, and strength. So please work with me on building that world that we know is possible. Share this information with your friends and family. Invite them to listen to the podcast. Share my books with them. They can download them for free. And of course, sign up for Civil. If you guys really want to see what I'm promoting with the 10-week opt-out challenge, you can see it right there on the screen. The QR code, if you want to scan that, it should work if you're watching and you're able to scan it. If not, just go to the link in the show notes. Go to civil.com/TCR. You can sign up for the 10-week opt-out challenge. Get 20% off your subscription with the code TCR20. And again, that is a limited time code. I hope you guys will check that out. And I'll be back here next week. As I said, I'm going to continue here in Houston and Texas for a little bit. Let me know. Should I go to Chicago? Should I go visit what's happening out there in those places and see what's happening? Or should I just avoid the whole scene because it's chaos and it's a waste of time? But if you guys think there's value in it and I can go out there and really bring you a story that I think is important, I might go there and be back next week to share that story. But until next time, guys, thank you so much for listening. I'm going to play 2 quick videos on our way out. One is a promotion for the People's Reset happening January 28th to February 1st in Morelia, Mexico, where I live. Tickets are currently on sale for only $188 USD. 5 days, solutions, permaculture, decentralization, conscious music, networking, 500 plus people from around the world. It's an amazing time, guys. I encourage you to go to thepeoplesreset.org right now. Check out our lineup, get your tickets. As I said, tickets go up on November 1st. And then right after that, we're going to end with a video from Alais Clay. I played her last week and a lot of you seem to enjoy it. So we're going to play another Alais Clay song and that'll be it for the evening. And then I'll see you guys next week. Or if you're on Civil, then I'll see you on Civil for the upcoming 10-week challenge, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Whatever you do, start focusing on solutions. Start thinking about what you're going to do for your family in the face of regime change, in the face of technocracy rising, digital IDs, biometrics, all those sorts of things. Express yourself. Use your voice in one way or the other. We're waiting for you. We're waiting for your contribution, my friends, and we're ready to see what you have to share. Till next time, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.
Our power is in our voice. Our power, it's in our thoughts. Our power is in our actions. Our power, it's already innate in who we are. We are the earth. We are the sky. We are the trees. We are our ancestors. We are the future generations. We are all that is.
Dread, Alais Clay, reaching all time, reaching all space. Yeah. Aliens go and drop that beat, release the rhythm, let it take over me, washing over like the waves by the sea. Any weights that I'm carrying, inhale and release. Through the music I find my peace, 'cause we living in a time that's like World War III. But the Jedi's arise simultaneously to bring love with the frequency. Venimos a elevar la frecuencia. ¿Cuál será tu circunstancia? Música sanadora para la gente. Este sonido si te alcanza. Desde la selva y la casa de tu barrio, conectando con el audio. Desde el presente hasta el futuro y el pasado, así que siempre hemos sanado. Corriendo por la sangre, con la música corriendo por la sangre, con la música corriendo por la sangre, con la bocina pa' que el mundo se levante, que el mundo se levante, que el mundo se levante. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, despiértense. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, despiértense. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, despiértense. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, despiértense. Cure to your new world disease, connecting to the source with the roots and the trees. Aliens go and drop that beat, release the rhythm, let it take over me. Yeah, 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 yeah. Venimos a elevar la frecuencia. ¿Cuál será tu circunstancia? Música sanadora para la gente. Este sonido si te alcanza. De la selva y la casa de tu barrio, conectando con el audio. Desde el presente hasta el futuro y el pasado, así que siempre hemos sanado.
Since 2012, the Conscious Resistance Network has been an independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. We work to create a world where corporate and state power do not rule over the lives of free human beings. Our motto is leading by example and helping others in their pursuit of freedom. Visit theconsciousresistance.com to find our articles, documentaries, interviews, podcasts, books, and more. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.